So, in this passage, as the book of Esther kind of heads towards this conclusion, we have the vindication of Mordecai. And so, Mordecai, who was sitting at the king's gate in ashes and sackcloth, weeping and mourning for the sake of Israel that was about to be destroyed, that now comes out of that same gate from the palace, now in royal robes and acclaimed, has a royal personage appointed so by the king. And so we have here, as the book of Esther concludes, the great metaphor for the yearned for delivery of the Jewish people from suffering and from pagan oppression, and being raised up from weeping and death and exile. And this now, the king, being Yahweh, the Lord himself, kind of appointing the Jewish people as the grand vizier of humanity, and kind of pouring out honor and glory upon the people of Israel. And that many people, then is that many people profess themselves to be Jews because the fear of the Jews came upon them, which we need to hear in the biblical language of that the worship of Israel, in a sense, they came to the worship of the one true God through Israel. And so this is the vision for kind of how things are supposed to wind up. And Jesus, in a sense, brings this, he tells his disciples that they will sit as judges on 12 thrones of Israel. And that, so what Jesus is working with is this yearning of Israel to be, in a sense, vindicated for their worship of the one true God. That, in a sense, they will be vindicated for not giving in to the pressures to conform to this world, to worship other gods, but that they stay true to God and his ways, and that they will be vindicated. And that ultimately all the nations will come to know the Lord God through them. And in the people of Jesus, the way that this gets changed is that this judging of the world does not happen through putting their enemies on a gallows, but rather in forgiveness and through merciful, suffering love. And what the way that has actually worked out in Christian history is that the witness of those who suffered for their faith, who actually were not delivered from the furnace of oppression, those Christians who were destroyed by the secular authorities, that in their witness of faith and total trust in God's vindication, the resurrection of Jesus, that many more actually became Christians through the persecution. That in a sense, it wasn't the victory that brought people to Jesus, it was their defeat, but particularly how they showed their complete faith and trust in God, even in the midst of their defeat, singing hymns on the way to the Colosseum. And so through Jesus, this image of, in a sense, we trust that we, as followers of Jesus, we will be vindicated, but not by the death and destruction of our enemies. Basically, King Ahasuerus says, if anybody comes after you, you can go after them and defend yourself. And this permission to defend themselves, basically, everybody was in awe of that. But as Christians, as Jesus's followers, we're called to have this engage in this powerless, merciful love that shows a different way, not a way of violence, of vindication through violence, but a way of trusting in God's power to deliver, trusting in God's love and the victory of the cross. And in that we will be, as the book of Revelation teaches us, in that we will be vested with glory. That when we are vindicated in the resurrection, that is when we will shine like stars with the love of God and Jesus Christ. So we yearn for that victory as well. But as Christians, we have a different way, a New Testament, New Covenant way of leaning into that victory and of accomplishing it in our time, of working towards it, which is by demonstrating through our actions the way of Jesus' love. A reading from the book of Esther. On the day that Haman was hanged on the gallows, King Ahasuerus gave to Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told what he was to her. Then the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. So Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. Then Esther spoke again to the king. She fell at his feet, weeping and pleading with him to avert the evil design of Haman the Agagite and the plot that he had devised against the Jews. The king held out the golden scepter to Esther, and Esther rose and stood before the king. She said, "If it pleases the king, and if I have won his favor, and if the thing seems right before the king, and I have his approval, let an order be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman, son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote giving orders to destroy the Jews who are in all the provinces of the king. For how can I bear to see the calamity that is coming on my people? Or how can I bear to see the destruction of my kindred?" Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and to the Jew Mordecai, "See, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows, because he plotted to lay hands on the Jews. You may write as you please with regard to the Jews, in the name of the king, and seal it with the king's ring. For an edict written in the name of the king, and sealed with the king's ring, cannot be revoked." Then Mordecai went out from the presence of the king, wearing royal robes of blue and white, with a great golden crown and a mantle of fine linen and purple, while the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. For the Jews there was light and gladness, joy and honor. In every province and in every city, wherever the king's command and his edict came, there was gladness and joy among the Jews, a festival and a holiday. Furthermore, many of the peoples of the country professed to be Jews, because the fear of the Jews had fallen upon them. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God.